Silas Boone's laughter cut through Oak Hollow's morning silence like a whip crack against tender skin. The sound echoed off weathered barn walls where May Turner stood, cradling 6-month-old Eli against her worn shawl, her weathered hands trembling not from the desert wind, but from the sting of public mockery. "Whose baby is this?" he had called out, his voice dripping with the kind of cruelty that only comes from those who have never known true loss. May's response would hang in the air like smoke from a dying campfire, changing everything. "Mine, until someone truly loves." The words struck Silas like an unexpected bullet, lodging somewhere deep in his chest where his heart should have been. The morning sun cast long shadows across Oak Hollow's dusty main street, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of amber and regret. May Turner emerged from the small cabin behind the general store, her arms wrapped protectively around the bundle that had become her entire world. 6 months had passed since that terrible night when young Sarah McKenna had died, bringing Eli into a world that seemed determined to reject him. The baby's soft breathing against May's chest was the only sound that brought her peace anymore, a gentle rhythm that reminded her why she had chosen this burden when everyone else had turned away. Silas Boone sat on the porch of his father's trading post, his boots propped up on the wooden railing, with the casual arrogance of someone who had never questioned his place in the world. At 32, he carried himself with the swagger of inherited privilege, his father's wealth and influence flowing through his veins like poison disguised as confidence. He watched May's approach with the detached amusement of a man observing an ant struggling beneath his boot, his pale eyes glinting with the kind of cruelty that masqueraded as humor in small towns, where entertainment was scarce and compassion even scarcer. The baby stirred in May's arms, his tiny fist emerging from the faded quilt that served as his blanket. She adjusted her grip, her calloused fingers gentle against his delicate skin, and whispered words of comfort that only he could hear. The weight of him had become familiar, a constant reminder of the promise she had made to his dying mother, but also of the isolation that had settled around her like dust after a sandstorm. The other women in town had stopped visiting, their initial sympathy curdling into suspicion and judgment as the weeks turned to months, and May showed no signs of giving up her charge. Silas's laughter erupted suddenly, sharp and cutting as broken glass. "Well, well, May Turner," he called out, his voice carrying the lazy drawl of someone accustomed to being heard. "Still playing house with that foundling, I see. Tell me, whose baby is this anyway? Surely someone in this godforsaken town must be missing their little bundle of joy." His words dripped with mock concern, each syllable carefully crafted to wound, and the few townspeople within earshot turned their heads to watch the spectacle unfold like vultures circling carrion. May stopped walking, her worn boots settling into the dust as if taking root. The baby's breathing remained steady against her chest, oblivious to the cruelty swirling around him like a gathering storm. She looked up at Silas with eyes that had seen too much suffering to be surprised by one more act of human ugliness, but something in her expression shifted, hardened like clay in a kiln. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of every birth she had attended, every life she had helped bring into the world, every death she had witnessed in rooms that smelled of blood and hope and desperation. "Mine," she said simply, the word falling between them like a stone dropped into still water. "Mine, until someone truly loves." The silence that followed was profound, stretching across the dusty street like a held breath, and Silas felt something shift inside his chest, a crack in the armor of his certainty that let in a sliver of light he had never noticed before. The words hung in the desert air like heat shimmer, distorting everything Silas thought he understood about the world and his place in it. He had expected May to shrink beneath his mockery, to scurry away like the other women who crossed themselves when they saw him coming. Instead, she stood there, with the baby pressed against her heart, her weathered face serene as carved stone, and something in her stillness made him feel suddenly small. The laughter died in his throat, replaced by a sensation he couldn't name, a hollowness that seemed to echo with the sound of his own voice thrown back at him like an accusation. May began walking again, her steps measured and deliberate, each footfall raising a small cloud of dust that caught the morning light. The baby's tiny hand had found its way to her collar, his fingers curled around the worn fabric with the absolute trust that only the very young possess. She had named him Eli, after the prophet who had heard God's voice in the whisper rather than the storm, hoping that perhaps this child might bring some quiet grace to a town that seemed to thrive on noise and judgment. The weight of him in her arms was both burden and blessing, a constant reminder of the choice she had made to love without condition or expectation of return. Silas watched her retreating figure with an attention that surprised him, noting the way she adjusted her pace to match the baby's needs, the protective curve of her shoulders, the gentle sway that seemed to come as naturally as breathing. He had always dismissed May Turner as one of the town's fixtures, like the weathered church bell or the crooked fence post by the cemetery, something to be noticed only when it served a purpose. But now, seeing her with the child, he found himself remembering fragments of conversations he had overheard. Stories of difficult births and midnight rides, of May arriving at remote cabins with nothing but her skill and determination to guide new life into the world. The baby's cry pierced the morning quiet, a sound so pure and desperate that it seemed to cut through the layers of cynicism that Silas wore like armor. May stopped immediately, shifting Eli to her shoulder and beginning the gentle rocking motion that had become second nature to her. Her voice rose in a soft humming, a melody without words that seemed to wrap around the child like a blanket, and gradually his cries subsided into the contented sighs of someone who knew he was safe. The tenderness in the gesture was so complete, so unguarded, that Silas felt something twist in his chest, a recognition of something he had never experienced but somehow knew he was missing. The townspeople who had gathered to witness May's humiliation began to disperse, their entertainment value exhausted, but Silas remained on the porch, his boots still propped up, but his posture somehow changed. The casual arrogance had drained from his shoulders, replaced by a tension he couldn't identify, and his pale eyes followed May's progress down the street with the intensity of someone trying to solve a puzzle. The baby had settled back into sleep, his small body relaxed against May's chest, and there was something in the picture they made together that seemed to mock everything Silas had believed about strength and weakness, about what it meant to be worthy of respect. As May disappeared around the corner toward the small cabin she called home, Silas found himself alone, with the echo of her words and the uncomfortable realization that his laughter had revealed more about his own emptiness than about her supposed foolishness. "Mine, until someone truly loves," she had said, and the phrase repeated itself in his mind like a prayer or a curse, depending on how he chose to hear it. The days that followed moved like honey through winter air, thick with unspoken questions that hung between Silas and the memory of May's words. He found himself riding past her modest cabin more often than necessity demanded, always with some fabricated errand that took him down the dusty path where her garden grew wild with medicinal herbs. Each time he passed, he caught glimpses of her through the window, rocking the child, singing soft melodies that drifted on the evening breeze, or simply standing in her doorway as if waiting for something the horizon had yet to deliver. The sight stirred something uncomfortable in his chest, a restlessness that felt like hunger but couldn't be satisfied with food. May had become the subject of whispered conversations throughout Oak Hollow, though not in the way she deserved. The women spoke of her with a mixture of admiration and pity, calling her foolish for taking on a burden that wasn't hers to bear, while the men simply shook their heads and muttered about the impracticality of a woman raising a child alone. But Silas noticed what others missed, the way she moved with purpose, the gentle confidence in her touch when she held little Eli, the fierce protectiveness that radiated from her like heat from a forge. She wasn't playing at motherhood. She was living it with an intensity that made his own life feel shallow by comparison. One evening, as purple shadows stretched across the valley and the first stars began to pierce the darkening sky, Silas found himself dismounting at her gate without having planned to stop. His horse snorted softly, as if questioning the wisdom of this unscheduled visit. But Silas ignored the animal's skepticism and approached the cabin with steps that felt heavier than they should. Through the window, he could see May seated in her rocking chair, the baby cradled against her chest, both of them bathed in the golden glow of lamplight. The scene was so peaceful, so complete, that he almost turned away rather than disturb it with his presence. But May had already seen him, and she rose with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to unexpected visitors, settling Eli in a wooden cradle that Silas hadn't noticed before. "Mr. Boone," she said as she opened the door, her voice carrying neither surprise nor judgment, only a quiet acknowledgement of his presence. "The evening's grown cold. Would you care for some coffee?" Her offer was simple, practical, but it carried an undertone of invitation that made his throat tighten with something he couldn't name. He nodded, not trusting his voice, and followed her into the warmth of her home. The cabin was smaller than he'd expected, but filled with a sense of belonging that his father's grand house had never possessed. Quilts hung on the walls like colorful prayers, and the air smelled of lavender and wood smoke and something else, something that might have been hope. May moved about her kitchen with quiet efficiency, preparing coffee with the same careful attention she gave to everything else, while Silas stood awkwardly near the cradle where Eli slept. The baby's face was peaceful in sleep. Tiny fists curled against his cheeks, and Silas felt an unexpected urge to reach out and touch the soft curve of the child's forehead. "He's beautiful," Silas said, the words escaping before he could stop them. And May paused in her preparations to look at him with something that might have been surprise. His mother, what was she like? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither of them was ready to explore. But May's expression softened as she poured the coffee into two mismatched cups. "Young," she said simply. "Too young to die, too young to leave him behind." But she loved him fierce, even in those last moments. That kind of love. It doesn't just disappear when someone passes. It finds a way to continue. Her words settled over the room like a benediction, and Silas understood that he was witnessing something sacred. Not just a woman caring for an orphaned child, but love itself, refusing to be defeated by death. The coffee grew cold between them as they sat in May's small kitchen, the silence stretching like a bridge neither was quite ready to cross. Silas found himself studying her hands as she held her cup. Strong hands, marked by years of bringing life into the world, hands that had caught babies and closed the eyes of the dying with equal tenderness. There was a story written in the lines of her palms, in the small scars that spoke of countless nights spent in service to others, and he wondered what it would feel like to have those hands touch him with the same gentle certainty she showed the child. The thought startled him with its intimacy, and he looked away, focusing instead on the way the lamplight played across the wooden walls. "Why did you really come here tonight?" May asked, her voice cutting through his wandering thoughts with the precision of a surgeon's blade. The question wasn't accusatory, but it demanded honesty in a way that made Silas shift uncomfortably in his chair. He could have offered any number of excuses: concern for her welfare, curiosity about the child, simple neighborly courtesy. But something in her steady gaze stripped away his usual defenses. "I don't know," he admitted, the words feeling strange on his tongue. "I keep thinking about what you said, about the baby being yours until someone truly loves him. It's been haunting me." May set down her cup with deliberate care, as if the simple action required all her concentration. "Love isn't something you decide to feel, Mr. Boone. It's something that grows in the spaces between one moment and the next, in the quiet times when you're not paying attention. It sneaks up on you like dawn. You don't notice it happening until suddenly the whole world is different. Her words carried the weight of experience, of someone who had watched love bloom and wither in countless forms, and Silas felt something shift inside his chest, like a door opening in a room he'd forgotten existed. From the cradle came a soft whimper, and May rose immediately, moving to Eli with the fluid grace of long practice. She lifted him with infinite care, murmuring soft words that seemed to calm him instantly, and Silas watched the transformation that came over her face, a softening that made her look younger, more vulnerable, more beautiful than he'd ever noticed before. "He's hungry," she said, settling back into her chair, with the baby cradled against her shoulder. "Would you mind heating some milk? There's a bottle on the shelf by the stove." The request was simple, practical, but it felt like an invitation into something larger than himself. Silas moved to the stove with uncharacteristic uncertainty, his hands clumsy as he prepared the bottle under May's gentle guidance. He'd never performed such a domestic task, had never been asked to participate in the intimate rituals of caring for another human being, and the unfamiliarity of it made him acutely aware of how much of life he'd been missing. When he handed her the bottle, their fingers brushed for just a moment, and the contact sent a shock of recognition through him. Not desire exactly, but something deeper, more fundamental. It was the recognition of possibility, of a life he'd never imagined, but suddenly couldn't stop thinking about. As May fed Eli, Silas found himself drawn into the quiet rhythm of the moment. The soft sounds of the baby drinking, the gentle rocking motion of May's chair, the way the lamplight created a circle of warmth that seemed to hold them all safe from the darkness outside. "I've never seen anything like this," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The way you are with him, the way you make it look so natural." May looked up at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made his heart skip. Not pity for his inexperience, but understanding, as if she recognized the hunger in him for something he'd never known he was missing. "Every child deserves to be held like they matter," May said, her voice soft but firm. "Every child deserves to know they're wanted, that their presence in the world makes it better somehow. Eli doesn't know he's an orphan. All he knows is whether he's warm, whether he's fed, whether the voice singing to him is kind. That's enough for now. That's everything." Her words settled into Silas's chest, like seeds finding fertile ground, and he understood that she wasn't just talking about the baby, she was talking about the part of himself that had been orphaned long ago, the part that had learned to expect mockery instead of kindness, judgment instead of acceptance. 3 weeks passed, like pages turning in a book Silas had never learned to read, each day bringing him back to May's cabin with excuses that grew thinner and more transparent. He brought firewood when her supply was adequate, offered to repair a fence that showed no signs of damage, and invented errands that required him to pass her garden just as she was hanging laundry or tending to her herbs. May accepted his presence with the same quiet grace she brought to everything else, neither encouraging nor discouraging his visits, but simply allowing them to become part of the rhythm of her days. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Silas began to understand what it meant to be needed, not for his father's money or his family's influence, but for the simple human comfort of his presence. The transformation didn't happen all at once, but in small moments that accumulated like drops of water, eventually carving stone. There was the afternoon he held Eli, while May prepared medicine for a sick neighbor, feeling the weight of complete trust in his arms as the baby slept peacefully against his chest. There was the evening he stayed to help with the washing up, learning the domestic rhythms that had always been foreign to him, finding unexpected satisfaction in the simple act of making himself useful. And there was the night when Eli woke crying, and May was exhausted from a difficult birth she'd attended, when Silas found himself walking the floor with the baby, humming half-remembered lullabies until the child settled back into sleep. It was during one of these quiet evenings that May finally spoke the words that had been building between them, like pressure before a storm. "He's going to need more than I can give him," she said, her voice steady, but her hands trembling slightly as she folded tiny clothes. "A boy needs a father, needs someone to teach him how to be a man in this world. I can love him, protect him, give him everything a mother can give, but there are things—" She trailed off, and Silas saw the fear in her eyes, not fear of inadequacy, but fear of loving someone so completely that losing them would destroy her. "What if he didn't have to lose you?" Silas asked, the words coming from some deep place he hadn't known existed. "What if he could have both? A mother who loves him and a father who chooses him?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implications that neither of them had dared to voice before. May looked at him with something that might have been hope or might have been terror, and Silas realized that he was offering more than just his help with the child. He was offering his heart, his future, his willingness to become someone entirely different from who he'd always been. The silence stretched between them like a held breath, filled with all the words they hadn't yet learned to say. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them of the vast loneliness of the prairie. But inside May's cabin, something new was being born. Not just the possibility of love, but the courage to reach for it, despite all the reasons it might fail. "I don't know how to be a father," Silas admitted, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't know how to be the kind of man a child deserves, but I want to learn. I want to try." May set down the small shirt she'd been folding and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see straight through to his soul. "Love isn't about knowing how," she said softly. "It's about being willing to figure it out as you go, about choosing to stay even when it's hard, about putting someone else's needs before your own pride. You've already started, Silas. You just haven't realized it yet." Her use of his first name felt like a gift, like permission to become someone new, and he understood that she was offering him more than just a chance to help raise Eli. She was offering him a chance to discover who he really was beneath all the layers of expectation and disappointment. As if sensing the weight of the moment, Eli stirred in his cradle, making the soft sounds that meant he was waking up. Without thinking, Silas moved to pick him up, settling the baby against his shoulder with a naturalness that surprised them both. "Hello, little man," he whispered, and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest as Eli's tiny hand curled around his finger. In that moment, Silas understood what May had meant about love sneaking up like dawn. Suddenly the whole world was different, painted in colors he'd never noticed before, filled with possibilities he'd never dared to imagine.